Hi, it's Steve Owens with Entertainment World. Today we've got a very special guest, somebody that I had an experience with 30 years ago, the amazing Kreskin. And I got to tell you, I don't remember everything that happened on stage, but I do remember the suggestion that he gave me on how to be able to sleep better. And it worked for like 5 years incredibly. I could literally lie my head on the bed and go to sleep. So,
Steve, it's good to hear from you. And 30 years ago, the rumors are that I was born in the 1880s, but that is not the case. But can you, the airline industry, Steve, announced just late last year that I have now flown in my career a little over 3 million miles. And so I'm on the road I'm only about 4 days a month, but I just got to tell you this because it's the new year and what transpires in my life. Not last year, but a year ago, we didn't do it yet this past year, but we count all the radio, television, and concert appearances. A year ago in 1 year, I did exactly 364 appearances around the world. So I'm on the road much of the time, Steve. That's all I can tell you.
Boy, I wish I could keep up with you.
Some of them were not all. People say you only had 1 day off. No, at the Toronto State Fair in Toronto, which is outdoors, and it's like a few thousand. The audience, I was there December before last for 19 days, but I did 29 shows in 19 days. My career, Steve, I don't mean this egotistically. My career's been like an adventure. That's all I can say.
No, it is. I mean, I remember you from the Johnny Carson show. I think you were probably his number one most recurring guest on that show.
Steve, can you believe I didn't know this until about 3 weeks after it went on the air, about 2 months. A company has purchased the shows, one of the cable companies, and showing them every night because I've been called like 20, 30. So yes, I did 88 Carson shows. The legitimate, the amount that's listed is 61, but without going into details, Carson, we never talked about it while he was still alive. He was very bitter because in the early days of broadcasting, of course, they didn't respect the records of things and what have you. And don't you know, NBC erased all of the first 2 years of his shows, every one of them. So I'm not saying Carson was bitter, but if you brought it up, he used language that you find in certain dictionaries that are not that popular or legitimately used, So he got. That's why all the shows are in a metal case underground in a part of California that he had hidden for a number of years. But the experiences I had through the years with him, because 30 years wouldn't you consider that a long run in any area of show business?
Exactly.
So and by the way, Jimmy Fallon does a fabulous job. He reveres Carson. Whenever we get together, we'll sit and talk after the show because he wants to hear all the experiences. And the man, there were a lot of things that went on. There's what, I've never told this publicly, but we're looking to do something in broadcasting with it. You're not allowed to see Carson before the show, and he used good judgment because he had some wisdom that a lot of people today do not have in broadcasting. They should have learned from the most powerful figure in the history of broadcasting. Steve Allen, before he died, sent me records about him and said, you must do his life story. A man forgotten today, his name was Arthur Godfrey. And nobody has any idea except it had the President Eisenhower and Vice President been assassinated. Godfrey was assigned to take over the country. Every major station had a disc about him saying, wait till I get to a live feed, because his voice was recognized more than the President around the world. But that's another story. It's a story about broadcasting that needs to be told. But at the same time, Carson, I had to see Carson because I was going to do something with him that I needed to program his mind, just as you responded on stage to suggestion. This was not a simple test, and he agreed. And yet 2 days before the show, I get a call from NBC, and I was somewhere in the Midwest. They said, Kreskin. I said, yes. They said, this is so-and-so, Vice President at NBC. You're not to do such and such with Carson. I said, okay. Because, Steve, you understand, you don't argue with NBC, the Pope of Rome, or St. Peter. So I agreed not to. Mm-hmm. Well, Next day, I get a call from Carson's secretary. She and I had a bit of a bond, and not that she betrayed anything, but she would alert me. She says, Kreskin, you're going to get a call from Johnny tonight. You're at a university. I said, yeah, I get back to my hotel such and such. Well, it's 3 hours earlier here because it's New York City. He calls me on the phone. He said, did you get a call from NBC? You're not to do this with me. I said, yes. He had some words to say. He said, just listen to me, Kreskin. We're going to do it. The day I come in the day of the show, and after seeing before the show, and the secretary is shaking as she leads me to his office. I said, you okay? She says, Kreskin, you know he doesn't see people before the show. I said, but he agreed to this. She says, I know, but I never did this. So she brings me in. He's sitting behind a desk with a single bare bulb on the desk table because it's his comedy, his top of the show comments, because that was his passion. And I had him stand, I had him close his eyes. I started suggesting certain things. I said, and this will be successful. You will not be under any strain. And I opened his eyes, what have you. And before he left, I saw the cards on the table. I said, Johnny, he says, yeah, I never was any good, but I still handle cards. I did something with him before I left. That was it. The night of the show, I go on the air. He comes up and stands next to me, and he nudges me in the shoulder. There's two guys sitting next to Fred DeCordova, the producer. I knew who he meant. They were in suits. They were NBC representatives. There they had to sit. As I counted to 10, Carson's eyes closed. His body became highly rigid. Ed McMahon and Doc Severinsen didn't know what to. I said, listen, he's going to start swinging back. Catch him. We caught him. We stretched him between two chairs, his head on one, his feet in the other. No trickery, nothing in the middle of him. Mm-hmm. I asked the lady to come over. She wouldn't. She was one of the guests. I said, please come over. She wouldn't. Fred DeCordova and Ed McMahon says, please come over here. They knew what I wanted her to do. She came over. I said, sit on the middle of him and lift your legs up. There she sat. He suspended between two chairs, legs up and what have you. Finally, I lifted her off. We brought Kreskin up. I released Carson up. I released Carson slowly. When his eyes opened, he said, I would have thought it was a baby. The lady that was afraid to sit on him was Bette Midler, and the picture of that scene was in Parade magazine, a centerfold all over the Western world, so it worked with him. However, what he saw me do, I will tell you this, and I'm saving this. I'm going to find a television special to make it part of my special. 6 times when I was on the air with him, the first time he says, a commercial break, come over here, Kreskin. I thought, Jesus, this is a break. What the hell does he want? He's like, come over here. And he left the other guy. He pulls a chair out from his desk, and Steve, he asked me to join him sitting under his desk. No one in the studio, no one in the audience. Fred DeCordova, the crew, the staff, nothing went on. He says, do that for me now. He knew he had 2.5 minutes. When we're finished, we get up, he hurries, sit down, and we're on the air. Nobody knows. 5 more times he did it. It blew his mind. And before DeCordova died, he met me at NBC. He says, Kreskin, for God's sakes, Carson would have fired us if we intruded. What the hell were you and he doing under the desk? So DeCordova was the only one. But I think this could be an intriguing part of a television special. Don't you agree, to finally show what nobody ever saw?
Oh, exactly.
But that's why Steve, because you brought up Carson, I had to tell you that has been an adventure through the years. By the way, I get a kick out of it that my name's mentioned on a lot of, about 20 times a week between news shows and a lot of sports shows. They'll say, I don't know what he's going to do. Do you think I'm Kreskin? And now, guess what, yesterday, one of the news people's interviewed me and says, what do you think of the Mariah Carey thing? I said, please, I didn't watch the show. And I said something real quick. Well, now it's all over the place. My remark was, my heart goes out to Mariah Carey. I tried reading her thoughts, but I kept getting a playback. Everybody, that's not malicious. I meant it tongue-in-cheek, Steve. Oh, I'm sorry, Steve. By the way, can I say something to your listeners? I promise you, folks, someday when I'm in the area if I'm working overnight and say I'll come on the air live with Steve, but I promise you, folks, I just have to be. I will dare not read his thoughts on the air. Steve, you were saying?
Okay.
Okay, Steve. Oh, jeez.
So I know that it was last year you predicted that Donald Trump would become president on Fox.
That's Steve. I can't. I'm gonna level with you. I cannot figure out what happened. Yes, 2012 for I predicted 4 of them. I went on Jimmy Fallon, gave him a steel metal chest. NBC put in the safe, and it was my prediction of the 2012 election, and that was 1.5 years before the election. This year, I didn't want to become involved. Because if you go on my webpage, there's pictures of me with Trump. I performed at his house. And I performed for a lot of private events. And then there's pictures of me with Clinton because I performed a lot in Washington. So I thought, I don't want people accusing me, hey, you helped this happen or all this crap that's going on. But 2 days before, I decided to file it away in a window in New York, a famous woman's clothes window, and a newsman was there. He brought it to a studio the day after election. After the election day, it was David Webb, that broadcaster, and they were going to open it. And he tells me when I arrived at the studio, before we're going on the air, he says, "Did you hear what Fox found?" I said, "What the hell is all this about?" And Steve, you go on my webpage. Fox sent me a copy in 2009, in December 2009. I went on a local show in Washington. I guess I was performing in Washington, and I was doing a news show, and I was overtired, and they asked me, who's going to win the election 11 months from now? And my remark was, I do know, but I don't want to get in trouble. Kreskin said, I've been in his house, the one that's shouting all over everywhere. But Steve, while I said it, and that's literally said it was Trump, I have no memory of ever doing it, and I watched the video, which is clear I was on. It's the strangest thing. I've never announced ahead of time, and here I announced it almost unconsciously. I can't even explain it.
Wow, that's amazing. So, what do you have in projections for 2017?
Well, I gotta share something I've saved for you, and I'll tell you this. I mean, I've made this picture, but I wanted to make sure I reserve this for you. I can't tell you right now, Steve, the reaction I've had from Hollywood and people in the Hollywood area. One producer, Canadian musical composer, who's composed for some major movies, did a video with me just 2 days ago. They're saving because they want to show it. But anyway, this is one of the predictions I made, and it's simply this. I don't think it's next year, but I think it will be in a couple of years. That you will see the return in the movie industry of double features. Now, when I explained it, and I have gotten so much support that, as this gentleman said, Kreskin, I pray what you predicted that you make it happen. Movies today, as we know, we go to see one movie. The percentage of highly reviewed movies is, I guess, now 25%. They're not getting the highest ratings. There's a lot of rehash and a lot of duplication and what have you. But what's also happening is that when you go to a movie, you see a 2-hour movie. Well, some of the greatest movies ever made, take Ralph Hitchcock movies, were 1 hour and 34 minutes. Mm-hmm. The Road to Rio movies and the Bing Crosby movies with Bob Hope were 1 hour and 24 minutes. Some of the great mysteries were 1 hour and 40 minutes. Yes, Gone with the Wind and so forth, it lends itself to 2 and 3 hours. But today we're getting noise, we're getting bantering, we're getting screaming. If you go to previews in the theater today for half an hour, you can't separate one from the other because they're only showing noisy highlights. Look at how many writers have left Hollywood or going into television because some of the best movies should not be padded with excesses, and I think this could help. And to be able to enjoy a comedy and then maybe a mystery as a double feature, and then having to sit and be forced to sit for a lengthy time, I think this could be a plus, and I believe that someone's going to have the wisdom, and I'll support them publicly to make this happen.
Great. I'd love to see double features. I loved them growing up as a kid.
But you understand, Steve, that if you wrote a book, and you wrote a tight book, well, let's say with Sherlock Holmes or whatever, Arthur Conan Doyle, and it was an hour and 35 pages. Can you imagine if a publisher came and said, well, to charge this much for the book, you got to add 100 more pages. You don't ruin the quality of creativity in that way. And that's what slowly happened. And I can't tell you the calls I got said, Kreskin, somebody had to say this. So let's keep our fingers crossed and move on from there. But I wanted to mention this because you, being really the expert and so integral part of the business, will understand where I'm coming from, Steve.
No, totally. I think that's a great idea. It means more profits for the movie studios too, which means more jobs for actors, which they will absolutely love.
And that's very, very much important. By the way, I want to say this to all the young people listening in that want to get into television, into show business, into the public relations field, into creative activities and so forth. Hear what I'm saying, because a lot of you know it, because I've done over 1,000 university shows in this country and Canada, over 1,000 university shows. First of all, if anyone expects a minimum wage of $15 in show business, you better go into some other business, because I was getting $15 a show when I was in $5 a show when I was a teen. Steve, that was big money, $5 a show. But I got a warning to make. And you should see the letters I get saying, thank you. No one told us this. First of all, understand, you young folks, there's no secrets left. None. Forget it. Forget about Russia tapping into our government and so forth. You cannot with electronics. So far, nobody has knowledge in how to seal something off. So, when Wall Street came around and the March on Wall Street, you had some kids defecating, but I certainly support protest, but not in such terrible taste. But I won't mention a place. I won't mention a company in Germany, but there's dozens and dozens and dozens of other companies in the United States who, if you go to get a job, and they ask you where you went to school, in New York, when, and they mention the time frame that this took place. In another room is then flashed on a wall hundreds of faces of the people who marched on Wall Street. Now let's take it to a current step, and I happen to almost know one name involved, because money will buy anything. Remember a few weeks ago when Trump won the election, and some students at university said they were upset, that they were very upset, that they couldn't take an exam. They got all in the news with sarcastically ridicule and everything, and in one case, one professor postponed the exam. Well, let me tell you, God forbid someone gets a list of any of these schools of those, what class it was that postponed the exam. I'm not saying someone got a list, but it's interesting what a certain amount of money can buy. That's just hear what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So if you go to get a job and they found you pulled out, do you think a person's going to want to hire someone who, under the stress of an election person, might have to handle stress in a new job? They're going to pass. This is a warning to young folks. You got to move on with life and realize you cannot erase your past.
I have a question for you, for the actor standpoint, is how can an actor or a writer or somebody stay focused? Do you have any?
No, that's a beautiful. I'm going to give a suggestion, and I'm going to borrow from some of the greatest thinkers of all time, because I read voraciously, and I just built an addition to my library, another house, because I've got over 9,000 books, and I review them all up. You read the lives. I've read over 1,000 lives of famous people. Some of the most successful people in history learn from their failures. You rise above failures. And in show business, you always have setbacks. Things don't work, what have you. You have to have a vision, and you can't. You have a future vision, but you also have to realize that it can be fragmentized, it can be played with and moved around. And then one more thing. Do what some of the greatest thinkers of all time did. Find a way, which we don't know how to do today, that you can stop the damn world and get off. What did JFK do in the White House after he met with the military or the advisors in the economy? He went into his office, closed the door, and read trash books and magazines. You heard me. Because he had to get his mind off what was hovering so strongly in front of him, so that later on when he looked at it, he saw it from a different viewpoint. Einstein, when he taught here at the university later in his life, and they told me he took a canoe out to the middle of the lake, pulled the oars in, and let the boat just drift so he could reflect. I run a half an hour every night with no earphones. I don't want to hear outside. I want to hear my inner thoughts. You have to learn, once you've been put all through this, to get alone and listen to your inner self.
I think that's amazing advice.
And I'm not, and Steve, I'm not saying this as a theory because I have found my method. Listen, I'm not saying that anybody has to get in a boat and has to go jogging or so. Just, I have worked on 84 crime cases, 84. I've just been called in the past 3 weeks on 2 murder cases. This is something that there's a gentleman in Hollywood that wants to put together a scenario, a series. We'll hope something like that happens. That's not the point. I've taught police who today, to be a policeman today, you got to be a lawyer. You got to be. I don't want to malign lawyers. I just wish that most of them had been the Titanic. But anyway, you got to be aware of everything, but you got to be able to come home and look at what you saw today in a different perspective. And they shut the room, not for an hour, just 7-8 minutes for no pet, no kid, no wife is coming or husband's coming in, and let their mind drift. If you do this for a few days or weeks, you'd be surprised, Steve, after a while, what your mind now learns to do and learns to give back to you.
I will definitely be trying that.
Well, Steve, something, I just hope we can, I have a book that's coming out, my 20th book, just not long ago. Maybe I can send it to you sometime and we can discuss the book over the phone. Otherwise, if I send it to you, it's a thick book. You use it as a doorstop. You can keep the doors open to your office. That way, people can get in or out.
I think that right there is the best piece of advice with pilot season coming up for actors here in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah. It's a stress season.
I think that's probably the best note to end this on, because it's something that will stick in their minds. You gave them a great suggestion.
Steve, it's my pleasure to add this, and I hope we can in the talking again in the future. I want to say something to you and our listeners as well, because as I've traveled through my career, and by the way, when I talked about the length of movies, I should have mentioned the Tom Hanks movie, The Great Buck Howard, because you folks ever want to watch it, and listening in, your family can watch it. John Malkovich plays me in the movie, and it was written by and it came out about 7-8 years ago. The love story is not, I don't treat women that way. They just had that spice to the story.
Right.
But everything else, John Malkovich did a damn good job of taking on the role of yours truly. But you know what? See, I'm not going to say to you and your listeners goodbye. Let's just say in the spirit of broadcasting, to be continued.
Sounds like a winner to me.